The wind cut through the mountain pass with a bitter chill, whipping Clara's thin coat against her shoulders. She had been walking for hours, barefooted in places, trying to escape the crowded city streets and the judgmental eyes of those who had called her worthless. She had nothing to her name, not a coin, not a home, not even a friend. All she carried was a small satchel containing a few scraps of food and a worn notebook where she recorded thoughts she feared would never matter to anyone. Her stomach growled as she stumbled over a loose rock. She had been searching for shelter, any sign of humanity in the wilderness, when she spotted smoke curling into the gray sky. Heart racing with hope and fear, she followed it, praying it led somewhere safe. Soon, she saw a cabin tucked between tall pines, smoke rising from the chimney. Relief and anxiety warred within her. She had no right to enter, no claim to warmth or safety. Still, she had to try. Clara hesitated at the edge of the clearing, gripping her satchel. A figure appeared in the doorway, a broad-shouldered man with rough hands and piercing eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He studied her silently, leaning against the doorframe, wary and alert. Clara's pulse quickened. This was her moment to plead, to beg, to survive. I have nothing to offer, sir," she began, her voice trembling. "But I can cook. I can clean. Anything. Please. I just need a place to stay tonight." Gideon's gaze softened slightly, though suspicion lingered. He wasn't used to visitors, let alone someone as fragile-looking as this woman standing on his doorstep. Yet there was something in her voice, a quiet humility, a thread of resilience, that made him pause. "You don't have much," he said carefully. "Why should I let you stay?" Clara swallowed hard, the lump in her throat making speech almost impossible. "Because I'll work for it. I'll do anything you need. I just need a chance." Gideon studied her, noting the honesty in her eyes and the careful way she held herself. There was no pretense, no demand. She offered what little she had with dignity and tact. Slowly, he stepped aside, opening the door. "Fine," he said gruffly. "Come in. But one mistake, and you'll find your way back into the snow." Clara's lips quivered into a small, relieved smile. The warmth from the cabin hit her first, followed by the warmth of a man who, against all odds, might see her worth where others never had. Clara stepped cautiously into the cabin, letting the door close softly behind her. The warmth from the fire wrapped around her like a blanket, a sharp contrast to the icy wind she had left behind. She could feel her muscles relaxing slightly, though a shadow of fear lingered. Gideon watched her silently, leaning against the doorframe with arms crossed, his gaze steady and assessing. "I'll start with dinner," Clara said softly, placing her satchel on the rough-hewn table. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar sensation of being allowed in. She rummaged through the small pantry Gideon had pointed out, finding flour, eggs, and dried herbs. Cooking had always been her small talent, the one thing she could control when everything else in her life felt impossible. Gideon remained seated near the hearth, quiet and deliberate, watching without interrupting. Clara noticed his eyes lingering on her movements, not with suspicion, but with a faint curiosity. She moved carefully, aware of every gesture, determined not to give him reason to regret letting her in. The aroma of simmering stew soon filled the cabin. Clara stirred slowly, savoring the way the heat from the stove chased away the chill in her fingers. When she finally placed a small bowl before Gideon, he raised an eyebrow, then took a tentative sip. "Not bad," he grunted, a flicker of a smile breaking his usually stoic expression. Clara's relief was immediate. She had expected criticism, perhaps dismissal, but instead there was acknowledgement. That simple recognition gave her courage to continue. Over the next days, she cleaned the cabin meticulously, organized firewood, and prepared meals with care. Every act, small as it seemed, was a declaration. She was capable, reliable, and willing to work, not for pity, but because she had a right to survive. Gideon, in turn, allowed her space to move and act freely. He didn't micromanage or watch over her like a prison guard, he observed quietly, occasionally offering guidance when necessary. Slowly, Clara began to notice the subtle ways he trusted her, leaving her alone in the kitchen, letting her choose what tasks to tackle, even sharing small moments of conversation by the fire. By the end of the week, the cabin felt less like a stranger's home and more like a shared space, a place where Clara's presence was quietly acknowledged and respected. And in the way Gideon looked at her, Calm, patient, and attentive, Clara began to understand something she hadn't felt in years: she might matter after all. The days at the cabin passed slowly but steadily. Clara's hands grew stronger from chopping wood and preparing meals. Her laughter, soft and tentative, began to echo through the small space, and the fear that had clung to her for years loosened its grip. Gideon's quiet presence offered a constant reassurance. He never pried into her past, never pressed her for explanations, yet in his calm observance, she found the courage to confront memories she had buried deep. One evening, after clearing the last dishes from the table, Clara sat by the fire, staring into the flames. The crackling warmth contrasted sharply with the chill in her chest, a chill born from old wounds and harsh words she had carried all her life. For years, she had believed herself unworthy, disposable, someone to be overlooked or abandoned. Gideon, noticing her quiet stillness, moved to sit a few feet away, letting her space remain hers while offering a steady presence. He didn't speak, but his gaze held understanding, patience, and respect, something Clara had never known. "I'm afraid," she admitted softly, barely audible. "Afraid that if anyone really knew me, they'd leave. That I'm just not enough." Her voice cracked, and she pressed her hands into her lap to steady them. Gideon leaned back slightly, keeping his expression neutral but his tone gentle. "You're not defined by what others say or think," he said. "And anyone who would abandon you isn't worth your concern." Clara's breath caught. No one had ever said that to her so plainly, without expectation or judgment. Slowly, she began to speak of the life she had fled, the loneliness, the harsh criticisms, the feeling of always being a burden. Gideon listened without interruption, nodding occasionally, never letting her feel small. By the time she fell silent, tears dampening her cheeks, she felt a strange lightness. The cabin no longer felt like a refuge just from the cold, it felt like a sanctuary from the world she had left behind. Gideon finally spoke, voice low but steady. "Clara, what happened before doesn't have to define you now. You have worth, not because of what you can do, but because of who you are." For the first time in years, Clara believed it. The fire's glow reflected in her eyes, and a tentative, genuine smile appeared on her lips. The past had returned, but with Gideon's quiet support, she was learning that it no longer controlled her. Life at the cabin had settled into a gentle rhythm, but peace has a way of inviting scrutiny. Rumors began to drift from the small town at the base of the mountains. Neighbors whispered about the mountain man who had taken in a stranger. Some were curious, others suspicious. When word reached Gideon's door that townsfolk were talking, he knew the quiet life he valued would soon face its first test. Clara noticed the tension immediately. One afternoon, while tidying the porch, she heard the distant shouts of men and women approaching. Her heart raced. Instinctively, she stepped behind the cabin, wishing she could vanish into the forest. Gideon emerged first, standing tall between Clara and the approaching group. "They're just curious," he said softly, though the rigid set of his shoulders betrayed his alertness. "We'll handle it." The sun rose slowly over the mountains, spilling golden light across the cabin and the rolling hills beyond. Clara stood at the edge of the porch, letting the warmth of the morning wash over her. Today was different. Today, she wasn't running from the past, and she wasn't shrinking in fear. Today, she would make a choice, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Gideon emerged from the cabin, saddling a horse for their morning ride. He glanced at Clara with a faint smile, the kind of smile that carried both patience and quiet admiration. "Ready?" he asked, voice steady but gentle. Clara nodded, a calm confidence settling over her. She swung into the saddle beside him, feeling the rhythm of the horse beneath her. For the first time in years, she felt capable, seen, and free. The path ahead stretched wide and open, much like the possibilities in her life. As they rode toward the small town for supplies, Clara noticed how differently she observed the world. She walked through the streets without hiding, met the curious stares of townsfolk with quiet dignity, and answered their questions with honesty. The fear that had defined her for so long had softened, replaced by self-respect and a new understanding of her own worth. Back at the cabin, they dismounted. Clara inhaled the crisp mountain air and turned to face Gideon. "I don't know what the future holds," she admitted softly. "But I know where I want to be. And I know who I want by my side." Gideon's expression softened, a rare warmth breaking through his usual stoicism. "You have every right to choose," he said. And I hope you choose to stay here. With me." Her chest tightened, not from fear, but from anticipation. "I do," she whispered, a genuine smile curving her lips. "I choose this place, and I choose you." Gideon reached for her hand, and she placed hers over his. For the first time, they both allowed themselves to feel the gravity of what this meant, not just companionship, but partnership built on trust, respect, and mutual care. The mountains stretched endlessly around them, a silent witness to their decision. Clara felt a peace she had never known, a sense of home that was more than a place. It was a life she had chosen, a life she could finally call her own. Together, they stepped into the future, ready to face whatever came next, knowing they were stronger because they had found each other.